China recently kicked off military drills over Taiwan, fueling speculation that they may try to invade the island sometime in the near future. So today, we're going to talk about the challenges that China will face if they make that decision. Now, the conventional wisdom in Washington for some time now has been that China is preparing for an imminent war with the United States over their efforts to reunify Taiwan by force. In fact, Chinese President Xi has directed the People's Liberation Army to be ready for war by 2027. That's something that's regularly cited by U.S. government and defense officials when talking about planning in the Pacific. And some top U.S. military officials just in the past year have said it looks increasingly likely that China might try to invade Taiwan as early as 2025. And then, of course, these recent drills over Taiwan just fuel the speculation that it might happen even sooner. Now, CIA Director William Burns is a little more skeptical, saying that, yes, China is preparing for a war with the United States over Taiwan, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen. And he points to a couple things here that I think are important. Again, we're going to talk as if this is a decision that's been made and the challenges China would face during the military operation. However, China could potentially bring Taiwan under their control via diplomatic, economic, or other means. It doesn't have to necessarily be military force. Another thing that Burns points to is that while China might want to be able to do this, the effort required to pull off an amphibious assault larger than anything we've seen since World War II is an incredibly complex maneuver. This is far different than tanks rolling across the border from Belarus or Russia into Ukraine. That is small potatoes compared to what would be needed in a very organized and timely fashion to conduct a successful amphibious operation invading Taiwan. And Burns questions, does China actually have the capabilities and the resources to pull that off? Now, something I want you to keep in mind as we're getting through all of this is the time that it would take for China to pull this off, right? So if you look at a map, you'll see that Taiwan is just about 100 miles away from mainland China, and you say, look how quickly China would be able to put, aircraft overhead, troops on the beaches, ships in the water. Yes, they would be able to beat most of Taiwan's allies to the punch there. U.S. troops are in South Korea, 800 miles away, Japan, 900 miles away, 2,000 miles away in Guam, and 5,000 miles away in Hawaii. China certainly could get to Taiwan faster, but what they have to be planning for is that it is incredibly likely that the United States and other allies of Taiwan will be moving to Taiwan's defense. So they don't have an unlimited period of time to conduct this amphibious operation, land, and take over Taiwan. It has to be done relatively quickly. And keep that in mind as we go through some of these challenges here. So first and foremost, just getting there. I think in the past, there might have been thoughts of an airborne operation. I would argue that as we've seen the war in Ukraine play out, that is increasingly unlikely. Right, an aircraft full of 100 plus paratroopers getting shot down with one surface air missile. It's not realistic. Taiwan has significant air defenses. There's no real chance that China would be able to move a sizable force via airlift into Taiwan. Maybe some special operations forces come in behind the lines, but the majority of the landing force would have to come by sea. When looking at that, the Taiwan Strait's over 90 miles wide. It's incredibly choppy, and due to 2 monsoon seasons and other extreme weather events, a seaborne invasion is only viable a few months out of the year. Now, those months are May, June, July, and October. So you can see as these drills pick up here in the middle of May, how analysts are looking at this and saying, wait a minute, this is one of those possible windows, right? It's getting a lot of people's attention. Now, transporting hundreds of thousands of troops across the Taiwan Strait is something that could take weeks. That's not a matter of one day or showing up in one big push. Even just getting one group across that Taiwan Strait in military ships would take hours. Taiwan is watching the strait. The United States and their allies are watching that strait. The minute that you start to see troop transports in any volume move across that body of water, they're going to be targeted. They're going to be under fire from Taiwanese assets for hours as they move across that strait. Now, it's worth noting that Taiwan does have the military capabilities to conduct strikes against mobilization points inside of China. They have the range with their current inventory. Now, I wouldn't expect that Taiwan does that in a preemptive manner, but the minute that it's clear that this war has begun, whether it's with Chinese airstrikes, missile strikes, or you start to see naval vessels moving over with the intent of invading Taiwan, all of those ports that the Chinese vessels are leaving from become fair game and well within range of Taiwanese munitions. So even if China is able to assemble this invasion force in secret and make it most of the way across the strait, now they got to find a place to land. And there's no easy answer there. There's no good solutions for China. And remember, going back to the beginning of this video, they got to go fast. Because in the couple hours it has now been since they kicked off this invasion, and they have not yet landed on the beaches, Taiwan's allies are mobilized and moving in to try to protect the island, which is widely believed would be the case. So those ships trying to move across the strait are about to become pretty juicy targets for U.S., Australian, Japanese, South Korean, and probably more militaries closing in to assist Taiwan. Now, looking at the landing possibilities for China, there's not a lot of good ones. There's some ports, commercial ports. Of course, that seems like an easy option. Deep water ports, but if you're Taiwan and you see this invasion force coming and there's already been a bombardment, it's not crazy to think that they would destroy their own ports, sabotage them, maybe even mine them to make them unusable for a Chinese force coming in. Then you have some beaches on the western side of the island. Again, the western side would be the closest to China, the quickest route for them to land forces, get the forces on land, and then move back for another shipment. But some of those western beaches have pretty significant shallow portions, which would make it far from ideal for a landing force. So the larger craft would not be able to get in very far. They'd have to dock or they'd have to stop a ways from the shoreline. Then the smaller craft would have to make long trips to get onto the beach under fire, likely the entire time. Remember, Taiwan has a lot of defensive structures built up along their western border. This is a scenario that they've been planning for. It would not be a surprise for China to land on some of these beaches. It's probably where Taiwan is expecting them. Now, China could opt to go around to the east, but that's not necessarily any easier. The east coast of Taiwan is lined by pretty significant cliffs that are way too steep for any military force to use as a feasible method of landing an assault force. And then, of course, once they're on land, you have to think that China is going to begin movement towards some of Taiwan's population centers. And when you look at the geography, moving from the shore into some of these major cities, it's like bowls surrounding, looking down on these roads, valleys, and passageways where it's likely Chinese forces would be under fire the entire way. And that brings us to the last piece here, which is a little hard to measure, but it's essentially the will to fight. Right? If you look at the terrain of Taiwan, this is not easy. Again, it makes the situation in Ukraine look very, very easy, very flat, all things considered. When you've got these mountains and these hills and this jungle-type terrain, very difficult to move a military force through, very easy to defend, all things considered. Right? If you just look back at the U.S. campaign through the Pacific, you can probably imagine what this might look like. And Taiwan likely has multiple layers of defense all across the island. Then you get into the will to fight, which we have learned recently is so important to understanding how a conflict plays out. Because remember, again, Taiwan does not have to defeat China here. They just have to hold on long enough for this to become too costly for China, or for Taiwan's allies to show up and cut off China's ability to resupply the forces on this island, whatever it might be. And historically, the home team tends to have an advantage when it comes to the will to fight. Not always, but usually. And again, the great example here is the war in Ukraine. What a lot of people, myself included, and a lot of Western analysts and governments underestimated was the Ukrainian will to fight and defend their territory. When you're looking at the possibility of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, you have to think that will to fight likely sits more with the Taiwanese people. It's something, right? That's not the overall determining factor of success or failure of a military operation. But when you look at all of the other challenges lining up here for China, if they make it through all of those in a timely manner, before Taiwan's allies get over here and start striking Chinese assets, they still have to deal with the will to fight of the Taiwanese people. Now, in closing, I do want to say this is kind of a quick walkthrough. Anything like this would be incredibly bloody, complex, and confusing to try to understand how it's playing out in real time. Hopefully, a military invasion of Taiwan doesn't happen, because this would be awful for the people of Taiwan. It would cost a lot of Chinese lives, and it would likely cost a lot of American lives, as well as some of our allies from the region there. But again, as we're seeing more of these drills kick off around Taiwan, I felt like it was at least worth bringing up some of these issues that China might face if they decide to go that direction. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which is linked in the description below. We've done a couple series recently on China, specifically talking about this and the possibilities of a Chinese invasion, as well as some historical looks at what kind of shaped China and their foreign policy into what it is today. Again, if interested, linked in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.